Thank you so much for your website. Yes, so when you guys are ready to maybe email or tell me whatever you want to do, I'll kind of see which ones you like, and I might have a feeling, and then we can have a bunch. So anyway, when you're ready, and you know, when you're back, so yeah, so that's a first. Is John short for John? Jonathan, don't let him call him. Different ones. Something's dry. And so this really is Well, thank you all so much for coming on an incredibly beautiful, busy 4th of July weekend, to come out and hear Danielle speak and to look at my dad's wonderful paintings and to just all be together today. My name is Karen Clark. I think I know most of you very, very well. I'm the owner of the gallery and have the joy of being able to go down to my dad, Mark Clark's studio, and pull some, of his beautiful smaller paintings together for this first show since he passed away, and it's been really sweet to see people come in all week and really enjoy his work and remember him. I asked Danielle Knapp, who is the McCosh Fellow Curator at the George Schnitzer Museum of Art, to, please, I just felt like it was the first reception for his work without him here, and I really wanted to do something special. And the George Schnitzer Museum next year in the fall is opening a show of both my parents' work, and I thought, I know she's extremely busy with the museum and as a mom, and so I said, you can say no, and she's like, no, I was honored. So, anyway,
she's feeling all the first lines on my little note card of things to say.
Oh, I was just going to introduce her, but now I get in front of an audience, I start rambling. I also wanted to get, we have several people from the museum here, and I know Danielle's going to be introducing them. I don't want to steal all her lines, but many of you might know that, or not know, that the Art of EC Comics is up at the George Schnitzer Museum, and actually that show closes July 10th, but until then it's free admission for everyone. So it's a great time to bring crowds and friends to the museum and get out of the heat and enjoy that show and also their permanent exhibit. So anyway, I've rambled on too much. Thank you again, and thank you, Danielle.
Oh, thank you. The reason I have my little note card is because yesterday I had this great conversation with Karen. We visited and spent some time with the work, and I wrote down so many quotes about, just as she was talking about the work. So I'm going to be stealing from her genius to mention some things that she talked to me about yesterday. And the first line of my little card is just to say thank you so much for having me here and being involved in this show. This is wonderful. I know with so many familiar faces here, and because we're talking about small works and it's kind of intimate, you can come closer to me too. It's very hard. You don't have to. And so I just wanted to mention too, just in case you didn't know, Mark had been a member of the McCosh Advisory Committee that supports my position at the museum and advises on David McCosh-related projects, other projects that are funded by this wonderful endowment fund we have that supports museum programs in David's name. And so I had the pleasure of working with him over the last 5, 6 years that I've been in that position, and always just a wonderful presence in my professional life there. So this is really wonderful to honor him in this way. And while we're talking about the GSMA, before I go into talking about this lovely show, I did want to introduce our newest curator as of yesterday, my new colleague, Cheryl Hardup.
Hi.
And who just relocated here from Puerto Rico. She will be our new curator for the Latin American collection and working with academic programs. So all the great work we do with faculty and bringing students into the museum for all different parts of the collection and exhibitions. She'll be their point person for that. So I've let her know that there's probably no better introduction to what people are interested in about Eugene art and the Oregon art scene than the conversations she'll have with people in this room. So please make yourself known to her, and please support her when she starts. We have her hitting the ground running with programs at the museum, so she'll be a familiar face too really quickly. So in talking about these works, there's a word that we use often in sort of curatorial discussions that comes up where we'll call a work, museum scale. And when we're thinking about potential new acquisitions for the collection or a big purchase piece that we want to apply for grant money for, or if we are planning a layout in one of our large galleries, we start with the big works. We start with works that are museum scale by an artist, something that you can maybe more easily imagine on a large blank museum wall than thinking of it in someone's home. And so sometimes those get a lot of the attention, they get a lot of the glory, and it's so wonderful to have an opportunity to strip that away, knowing that Mark did paint on a larger scale, and we have some of his larger works at the museum, and we've been talking about the planning of the show that we'll do of Mark and Peg's work, and that will open in late 2017. In planning that too, we'll start with thinking of scale as such a consideration. So to have this time where we're honoring the small works, the beauty of the works, the power of these works, and that they're worthy of their own attention is really wonderful. It's a great counterpart to discussions that will happen, over a year from now when we open our show, which I'm sure will include works of all different sizes. And often, works like these too, they bring to mind the way that historically small works were meant to be enjoyed and have that personal relationship, like religious icons in a home or a picture in a locket. There's something just so personal that you can have that sort of visual ownership of it so quickly. And seeing how many of the works have already been snapped up by lucky people, it's clear that it's resonating with people in that way. But Karen, talking to me about the works the other day, she said just because they're small, they didn't take, don't assume that they didn't take just as long or just as much attention to paint as the larger works. And this being the first show where all of the works by Mark are small works, and a lot of them are relatively recent. I think you said the earliest work in the show is from 1997. There's one on this wall. This small piece, this beautiful quiet landscape, and then some were just from within the last year, so coming up to some of the most recent works that he had given us. And so I've been thinking about how is he so successful at condensing these expansive ideas, these landscapes, or these wonderful personalities and some of these anonymous figures, and how did he condense them into such a small space to work with and do that so successfully that nothing is lost in that experience? And I had to ask Karen, what was the purpose of these for him? They weren't studies, they weren't meant to be a practice painting that would become something larger, be revisited at a later time, blown up and explored in a different way. These were completely, fully realized, standalone pieces. And my actual first introduction to Mark's work when I moved to Oregon 9 years ago, there's a beautiful painting that's sort of similar to trees and a landscape with a beautiful multicolored horizon line in the Lillis Business Hall in their coffee shop, if you've ever walked on the first floor coffee shop on campus. There's one of his artworks on this wall, and it has no label. The university doesn't have a label on it. It's part of the university collection. I imagine it's probably a % for art purchase when the building opened in 2003. His signature is on it, but there's no label, so I couldn't tell you the title or the date of it. And the first time I saw that work, I was with a coworker or student in my program who had lived in Oregon longer than I had, so she was familiar with. It's Jessica Wilkes, actually, who many of you might know. She's now the registrar at the Tacoma Art Museum. She's a graduate of the master's program here from years ago. And I had stopped to look at the painting, and she said, oh, that, as we walked up, she said, that looks like Martin Clark. She goes, Eugene Painter, beautiful red barns. Like, that was the one thing. She knew, there's no barn in that painting, but she's like, that's what he does. But it was in such a respectful view. That's the information she gave me. And I have always, in the years then that I went on to be pleased to know him, know his work, I still always just think, Eugene Painter, red barns, and everything else beyond that is just as important. But that was my introduction to his paintings there. So Kurt and I were talking about how working on these small scales was a way to keep his hands busy, especially if he was working on an easel painting, and it was a large work, and it needed time to dry, and he was still thinking and had his palette out, that he would turn and pick up a small piece of the board or canvas and maybe hold it in his hand and paint on it, or lay it on the table and paint on it, and just be able to just always moving and always using the imagination to continue to expand ideas into all different sizes. And then some of the works, you said there was evidence of compositions on the back too, is that right? That some of these, he was just, there was not enough for him to paint on that he could get his hands on. Also too, we wanted to acknowledge that many of the works in the show are frames that he made. So we know that Mark was a craftsman. We know that he worked with his hands, and framing was just as important. And sometimes a painting was an excuse to be able to add a beautiful frame and think about presenting the work. And I just love that in thinking about these two, you can imagine there's such beautiful symmetry between the smaller works and the imagery in his larger works. You can imagine, removed from this context, which I'm holding this card too, when I first look at this, you can imagine this being a very large museum scale work. You could easily picture this being painted, this giant painting. So it translates so beautifully into the small size without sacrificing anything. And I love that with all these imagined places, drawing from his memory and his understanding of our landscape that we all live in and enjoy and see and experience daily, and the figures that he painted, they seem so recognizable, and you feel like you should know that place. Like, oh, I must drive by this. I must know this person. And I think, Karen, did you say some of these too you thought might have been self-portraits in terms of or maybe Peg can answer that too. Or some of these.
I don't know if I can answer about these specific pieces, but I put one in my room, one that he did not paint from the mirror or anything, but it just looks like it's sort of an alter ego. And
put so much into
so I think a lot of his made-up figures, resembled him, and some of the female figures he made up resembled me or Mara. But not always. He sometimes got pretty goofy, like this Picasso esque.
Yes. So, and the question too of why paint small and why artists choose to paint small, especially for artists who are comfortable and so competent working on such a wide range of sizes. There have often been financial or strategic reasons for why an artist would produce small works, that they can maybe sell them more easily and more quickly, especially if they're raising a family and need to earn a living off their artwork. And also, I know with Mark later in life too, Karen was explaining how when he would spend more time in the studio, he'd always loved to paint on site. We know he loved to paint outdoors, but later on in life when he would spend a little more time painting inside, small scale, he would start to work on a small scale even more so because he just sort of piled them up. And she mentioned that even when he had passed away, he left a painting on the easel and small paintings that were out to dry. I just love that imagining that memory. And I wanted to sort of wrap up and then sort of at the end of this too, rather than having sort of a Q&A session, we really wanted to invite people to also share their responses. We're certainly welcome to ask questions, but we would love to also hear your reactions to the work, knowing that so many of you knew Mark much longer than I did, and Karen longer than she did. A lot of people have known him for so much of his life, so we'd love to, if this became a conversation about that. But I just wanted to also finally point out how impressed I am by Mark as a colorist. The masterful way that he used this preferred palette of the orangey red and the green and the yellow. They don't end up so warm and so rich and so harmonized by accident. So, I avoid putting green and red together on anything that I do because it screams Christmas to me. There's color associations that if you're not a master at it, will go in all sorts of different directions. And this palette is just so, he's just such an expert colorist, and he would be too humble to explain. He'd say, I'm just correcting my mistakes and working along and making changes as I go and responding to it. But this is something that you would know deeply how to make this work. And then I love, to give a nod to Karin, having curated the show, what must have been impossible selections from so much work that would be available. The beautiful blue, the piece on that wall, to liven up the room and give that fresh breath of air to all the palette is just such a wonderful resting spot for the eyes. And I'm really excited to hear what you all think of the work. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I think about the work. And I think I'll end with that. And if anyone would like to talk about anything, you should do that.
Well, thank you, Danielle. So any comments, or we could try to answer questions for my dad, who's a bit mysterious.
I have a comment that relates to this issue you're bringing up about smaller works, which I think was a real interesting issue to bring to bear. And I think that Mark's modus operandi is that he had kind of a flowing imagination. It's just like if he was sitting down watching television, he'd be, just sort of scribbling, just kind of, little images that look sort of like this, kind of like a Picasso-esque little things, or like this particular abstract. And just there'd be a whole envelope or a piece of paper with these little images on it that just kept that he. I really don't think that he overthought very much. I think that he just was kind of flowed. He was in conversation. He sometimes could be very funny, and that was really his nature. And I think that was one reason that he liked doing these little pieces. It was just he was very comfortable in his little basement studio. He get a chair and he could just be working on them, even if he didn't have a whole lot of energy. Just because it was a continuum. That's what I mean to say, is that his mind as an artist was a continuum of imaginative thinking.
I just want to add that going along with what you were just saying reminded me of something funny. We were having coffee with him, and I would ask something, and he would always draw it. He would always draw the problem that I was talking about. Or he would just draw, and then he would show it. He had his little notepads, and he would always have the notepad. And whenever you tried to exchange information with him, he'd say, "Let me get out my smartphone," and that was his smartphone. That's his little drawing pad. Because he would not have a smartphone.
No, exactly. Never had a smartphone. That's a good anecdote.
Well, thank you again. Oh, was there another? Sorry, yes.
Can you talk about that?
I have just a couple little things to say. Well, one thing is, I just remember my dad saying a couple of times, well, I like people to fill in the leaves for themselves. He didn't like it to get too detailed. And then sometimes people would say, I kind of see a figure there. Oh, really? Yeah. But he would never say one way or the other. He liked people to really be able to have their own experience. So I think the more abstract or the softer his work, and then of course he'd make jokes too, like, oh, maybe I'm getting old or something. And he painted more and more from memory, so it was less about getting a specific realistic place, like that's Junction City Barn or whatever, but it was just more about a feeling about a place. And then he did use larger, he used almost like those small house paint brushes, and so it's hard to get too much detail with a real saw, and some of them are just real worn down, and so he has these great old brushes. My daughter wants one, and he just one of those brushes, that he just worked on and kind of scrubbed away and layered things up and glazing and working on things over time, lots of layers. So those are the things that I thought of.
Thank you.
I have two thoughts that came to mind. Question one is that he was a person that loved his immediate experience, and he grew up in Junction City, and we went to school first initially in Corvallis, and he had grandparents that lived in Minville. So 99, the highway, was, he owned that, and he loved it. He always loved it. When he would go to school, he loved going back home, and he memorized a lot of the landscape that were, but he loved it so much that I think all of these images you're talking about were just expressions of a feeling for how he felt about that, and he deliberately wanted it to be soft, and then just to respond to the other part, technical, just use one word, stumble.
Thank you. Get that word.
I wondered if you went through different periods. When we moved here 7 years ago, my husband collected 3 of his paintings, and they're all rather dark, dark hues. And we see here that there's a lot of color and vibrancy in his work. Was this a natural progression, or, I mean, were there other periods of his life where...
I think there are time periods, definitely. And I don't know if I could say exactly when they were. I remember even as a kid kind of being able to read some things about my dad through his work, you know. And he did, you know, the last show, some of the work was brighter. People really noticed that. And he actually said, which I always thought he just did absolutely what he wanted to do with his art, but he actually said, well, people were saying my paintings were a little dark or something. And so there were some brighter, I mean, like this one that was on the card, that's a real reason. That didn't even have a frame on it, and I'd never seen it before. So that's a really new painting. And I don't know why it wasn't in his last show, but there it was. And I thought, well, okay, we'll start with this. But it's definitely a brighter piece. And then there was a series of paintings that he did when my son was really ill, and my mom and I grew up at the hospital, and there are all these, we actually did a little show of those, I think when Tina and I first opened over here. We were doing the gallery together, and they were all just a lot of faces, like really haunted, strange pieces. And he talked about that once at an art walk, and it's like he just kept himself busy, and they're kind of strange and heavy and amazing, you know, but I don't think any of them are here. There's actually one little tiny piece in the back room, and that may be from that period. It's called Face Number 1. It's about this big. And I think there were time periods where his paintings were rich and dark, but you know, he'd surprise you. You would have a show of his current work, and people say, oh, is this a retrospective from 40 years? It's like, no, this is 1 year, you know, and he just changed it up. So, I don't know, do you?
Well, I just think that the dark paintings were not so much a phase as a very long period. Is that he worked a lot of blacks and just really dark colors. They were rich, and he developed it, but that was characteristic of his work for longer than, you know, 10 or 20 years.
Well, it used to be darker here. It got sunnier because it's a little warmer.
I don't know why. I don't know why either. You know, because
well, I asked him once, and I'm sure he's just teasing me, and I was one of those people who was constantly talking about his dark palette and so forth and so on. But I said, as a native Oregonian or a native of the Willamette Valley, it looks very much like Oregon. And for me, the prototypical Mark Mark painting is the landscape in winter, just around the corner. And I know he was teasing me, but I said one time, well, why is your palette so dark? And he said, because down in the basement, there's not much light.
that sounds like him.
I have a question. How did you go about selecting works? How did you start?
Okay, well, first of all, it was very strange to think about doing a show. And like, do we do a show? Do we wait till the museum has a show and then do a show at that time and just hold off? But a lot of people have been wanting to see his work, and he's a huge part of the gallery. And I just thought, okay, well, I need to do something. And a couple reasons were actually very practical. One is that I didn't want to sell a lot of work before the museum had selected their show. I told Danielle this, you know, I figured that, you know, museum scale that you would be probably looking at not pieces this big, but you never know. And also, I just wasn't emotionally kind of prepared to get into everything and look through everything and try to make some kind of, I just wasn't ready to come up with a theme or a statement. It was like too soon, but honestly, that he had a lot of his little paintings kind of in boxes that were kind of right at the front of his studio area, and it was really, it just seemed like it would be very easy to put together a show of small works, and it would be, and also that people that have been missing him and wanting a painting, probably, you know, most all of us are kind of running out of wall space, so I had these kind of practical reasons, but also it just seemed like it would be a nice, easy thing to do, and his small paintings are wonderful, and I thought I could just pretty easily select out a show of these wonderful small pieces, and it didn't seem like it would work against, you know, the museum exhibit, and it would, you know, be a chance to have a little show for him, and I think that was the main reason. I mean, because there will be shows down the road, but this felt like an easy place to start, so to be honest. Oh yes, Roy. Just went for scale. I tried to show the range. You know, he was very free in what he painted, you know, and he allowed himself to do whatever he felt like. And I really did want to have in this small show I wanted to have a couple of, you know, I found a red barn, so we're good. And I found, you know, this other wonderful barn, or collection of outbuildings. And, you know, these figures from his imagination, I wanted to try, you know, the pieces with these amazing frames that he made, I wanted some of those in there. So there was more than just the box of small pieces. I mean, there really was some thought, you know, of what he's known for. They're small, but many of these soft landscapes that seem like they could be bigger paintings, like Danielle was saying. And then I wanted, you know, over the years he did collages that were just these shape things. Now this is actually a painting, but it looks so much like the collages he did over the years. And I felt like that was a good representation. And a couple of these I'd seen before and have showed, and many of these I hadn't seen. So it was a combination. But I sort of felt like even in this little show of small pieces, I wanted his range to be represented. So I think that's what I meant to say before. So, sorry. Okay, well, thanks you all. I think we still have some wine to finish off, so please help yourself. And Kevin, thanks for filming this. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Danielle.
Well, let's see. So I have a group here, a group over there, and a group over by the snack table. So I actually don't have a real major reason that I use birds other than the birds are cool. And I've always said that I wouldn't want to live in a world that didn't have birds. Like, just to hear them, you know, is like part of life affirming experience for me. But it's, there's another one of my students. But I take liberties with the birds a little bit, you know. The colors aren't necessarily true, the forms aren't necessarily true, because what it really does is it gives me an excuse to play with aesthetics in my work. So I take the color of the bird or the pattern of the bird, and then I just start playing with the idea of pattern and color that are related to the bird or that are actually really different than the bird. You know, so the idea of having some sense of the organic and then some sense of the mathematical or the engineered, and then some sense of a sense of sky or land or earth, but also the idea of decoration. You know, so male birds are very decorated. As a male, I kind of relate to that. You know,
Nice shirt.
You know, like I love that. You know, I look at back in the old, you know, medieval period, and the men were peacocks. You know, and they had all the fancy clothes and the cane, and I think I had some part of me lived back there once. So I'm living that out in this work, I guess, in some way.
And it's working in your shirt too.
Yeah, right.
I've got two.
Patterns.
So the
I
medium.
used to have no interest in patterns at all, but about 5 years ago I got really interested in pattern. And I'm getting more and more interested in pattern, and I'm also interested in kind of filling stuff up, and I think that one of the things I try to do with my work is that, like I was talking about before, like with a poem or a story, like a story, I mean like a myth, a story, a real story, that the more you investigate it, the more you're going to see, the more you're going to get out of it, that it's going to reveal itself over time. And that you might start noticing things you hadn't noticed before.
You might want to migrate. So technique.
You can migrate over to the wine.
No. Later. I want to know more about this. So how do you, this is on paper. What kind of papers?
Oh, it's just printmaking paper, really.
And
No,
so then you
just
mount it on
rag
board,
paper.
or what do you do then?
It's mounted on archival foam core, wet mounted, and the frame shop does all that.
All right.
You know, I just paint them on the wall.
Roll it up,
And
and
then
then
I-
they do it.
Well, I try not to roll them, but
Oh,
yeah.
right,
And then I take them to the frame shop, and they just take care of them.
Who does your work?
Vistra. They're great. They've been very good to me.
Good. And if you observe these birds, what do you paint? Did you do it, any of this outside, or is this a?
No, again, this is, I'm interested in, so to me, at the heart of art making is solving a problem, right? You're going to set up a problem and solve a problem. So a lot of artists work out a lot of sketches, or they kind of have a plan where they're going. When I started painting these paintings, I have no idea where I'm going. I pick out a bird, and then I'll start to sketch the bird, or roughly paint the bird, which doesn't look anything like that when I start painting it. It might just be blue and yellow. And then I just start building the shapes in relation to that, and I see where I end up. So it's an experiment and it's a discovery. It's not a plan for me. So I have no idea what they're going to look like when I start, other than I know they're going to have hard edges, they're going to have angles, they're going to have pattern, and they're going to have color. That's all I know when I start them.
So did you use stencil, or did you?
Some of that is
some
stencil,
huh?
yes.
Yeah.
Some of it's drawn, some of it's stenciled. And the other thing that about my work, you know, sometimes artists have a palette, and I really don't want to have a palette, right? So I'll have that color, you know, I'll just pick. I'm going to say I'm going to make a yellow and green painting. I'm going to make a pink and blue painting. I'm going to make a blue painting. I'm going to make a red and yellow painting, and just try to push color in a lot of different directions, so that I'm not I don't want to repeat myself.
And you're not judgmental about it. I mean, saying one's your favorite and one's not. How's that?
Well, usually the one I just finished is my favorite.
Huh? It's right there. It's real, right?
And actually, probably right. And the two most recent ones are the pink ones on the other side. They're long, skinny. I'm kind of interested in this long, skinny format now, which is kind of weird to play with. And so those are my favorites because those are the two most recent pieces.
Do the personalities of the birds influence what you do with the rest of the painting? Like crows are
Not-
a lot different from
Right.
chickadees.
Well, in all honesty, I actually pick birds that are small and that are a little bit humble. I mean, I did do that one hawk, but mostly I pick small birds that are a little bit humble and just bring a song into the world. And so I don't think I think about personality, because for me it really is about just trying to deal with aesthetic problem solving, and then hopefully that ends up looking nice when I'm done.
Thank you.
He's here. More questions?
Yeah, questions
Yeah.
are good. So I also teach, and I always say to my students, if you have something in your head that you're wondering, probably somebody else is thinking the same thing. And so if you ask a question, you're actually asking a question that someone else is wondering about.
Yeah, any personal favorites from any of you here of these?
And these are for sale too.
Is that right? And quite affordable, actually. So think about it.
Are these yours also?
Yeah, there's the ones on this wall by the snack. Yeah. So they're all scattered around.
Anybody else? We have like 8 or 10 minutes for you to enjoy this, for sure.
Okay, so again, the question that I just received was, do I go watch the birds and sketch them? And I don't. When I spend time outside, I spend time outside by myself a lot. I just appreciate them. To me, it's almost like two different worlds. Like that world, I'm there and I'm watching birds, and this world, I'm in my studio and I'm playing with color and shape. And probably one has to do with the other, but it's not directly related in a weird way. Maybe more of a sort of soul level way. But, so the answer is not really. Just find a picture I like and start playing, and then sometimes I'll just turn their head or spin them around or angle them, or I take liberties. I'm not like Audubon, like I definitely take. There's another one, students. I like seeing these students.
We do.
How about the little details, like what looks like lace in these pictures, or sort of Egyptian?
Right. Well, again, just playing with the idea of pattern. I see patterns in the world, I see patterns in the birds, but the idea of just how can I incorporate a sort of structured pattern with an unstructured space and sort of harmonize them. So again, it is a little bit, art is like a scientist, where the scientist is dealing with minutia, right? Because the scientist is thinking about, I'm going to study this fish, and I'm going to study this fish in a way that no one's ever studied this fish, and come out with information that no one has ever figured out about this particular fish, and it becomes about minutia in some sense. And so the idea of like, I'm playing with color and surface and shape, and how do I incorporate these things together, and how do I make this work with this, and how do I make that work with that, and it becomes to some extent an academic artistic exploration, right? Rather than a kind of emotional response for me.
Well, it's kind of cool because as a viewer you get to interpret a lot of what's going on. And this is kind of cool. I mean, this whole cosmos thing here with this bird and thing is interesting dimensionally. And it just, kind of grabs you. I like that.
And well, so for example, the motivation for this piece was I actually saw a program about Australia, and so in the outback they had the color of the outback, and there was this river, and there were these pelicans that were using the river to migrate for, and that was the inspiration for these two paintings, just the color and the idea of migration, even though these birds have nothing to do with Australia. Those are western bluebirds, but so like, oh, I'll try that, or oh, I'll try that, and then like I think a good storyteller may have a certain idea, but that doesn't mean, if someone else interprets the story differently, well, that's wonderful, right? Whatever way anybody interprets it is wonderful.
Good.
There's not one way to see it. there's as many ways to see it as there are people here.
That's right, and you're set free to do that, right? Like a bird. Yeah. You can sing your song now if you'd like. So, great insights. Thank you very much. And so, Mingo, talk to him. Also, I have the yellow pen.
I remember last time we talked about
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Lindberg. I'm an arts administration student at the University of Oregon. My focus is community arts. I also work in the Natural Cultural History Museum. I'm doing the host team tonight on the Art Walk. Thank you for coming to our third stop at the Karen Clark Gallery. I first want to introduce Karen. She is the proprietor of this fine institution. Yeah.
Hi, thank you all so much for coming. We actually haven't been a stop on the an official Art Walk stop for quite some time because we're such a small gallery, but Laverne Krause is such a significant artist, and for the younger generations coming up that may not have had a chance to study with her or know of her, I thought it was an important opportunity and a wonderful chance to get to talk a little bit about her. First, I'd like to introduce Darsha Krause and Jay Krause, who are the son and daughter of Laverne. And also, can we have, is Norma Driscoll going to come? Is Norma Driscoll going to join us too? We have a really long-time friend of Laverne's that I'd like to come up here too, because these people know more than I do. Just
the real legend. Okay.
The legend of Laverne Krause. But briefly, Laverne had a career for a long time in Portland, but also in Eugene. She taught at the University of Oregon for 20 years. Yes. Founded the printmaking program and mentored scores of students who just love her. She was such a champion for the students and for Oregon artists. And that's why we called the show, or Darsha titled it, an Oregon Original. So at this point, I don't know if you all want to say something or if you want to do questions.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just turn the mic over to you.
Well, my mother, Laverne, grew up in Oregon. In her childhood years, she was out in the rural areas of Clackamas County primarily, Canby, Molalla, and I think that's where her love of the landscape began. She was an only child, and her mother would give her a pencil and say, "Why don't you draw, honey?" And so that's how she got interested in art. Then she grew up during the Depression, World War II. Then she came to University of Oregon, where she met her friend Norma, who was a lifelong friend.
Brought me into art.
She brought
Yeah, well, I was going to go into journalism, but she said, get into the art school, and I was in there more than a month.
Well, there's something even I didn't know. And so she attended University of Oregon, got her degree, then she got married a week after that, and had us children. And she continued to pursue her art, and she was up in Portland for probably 10 or 12, no longer than that, maybe 15 years. And then she got a job at University of Oregon, so she came back and she spent the rest of her life in Eugene. And she branched out beyond landscape. She also really loved buildings. And she said if she'd been born at a different time, maybe she would have gone into architecture, but at that time it was pretty much a male profession. So we brought the work here because, well, my mother was prolific, and the public seems to really enjoy her work. And so we wanted to do another show. And I'll let Norma talk now.
Well, I met Laverne years ago, of course, prior to and she did get me into the art department, which I have more or less followed all these years. We were a lot in various in some of our ideas about painting, but I was reading thinking about her today, she certainly was an artist in all the full sense of the word. And if you are really interested in the legend of Laverne, I mean, it's here. And she was very good at what she was good at, especially printmaking. We got into a lot of different various and sundry degrees in our lifetime together, but I certainly admire her persistence. We used to go out landscaping. I remember she was so temperamental, she kicked her foot through one of her paintings. And you know, it was just her temperament. I mean, she was basically a real artist, and I think that's the thing you really appreciate in the work that you see here today.
Thank you for coming.
I
don't have anything to add.
Do you guys have a particular piece that you want to showcase that you know was a favorite of Laverne's or a favorite of yours?
Wow. This show, I really like this. This one right here? No, the small one right here.
Why is that?
Oh, I just love the colors, you know.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I just love the colors and I like it. I don't know why.
That's all right, Jay. You have a right to like it.
And I've been enjoying some of the figure paintings. The self-portrait over here, I think, is a lot of fun. She would have been about probably 35 to 40 then. And
I got the background. It's called Self-Portrait of My Life.
Yeah, it's called Self-Portrait of My Life. And I'm in the background reading. And my parents had gotten divorced, and my mother bought a house, and those French doors are in the front hallway of that house. And to the right of her, it looks like that's one of her steel bridge prints with the train tracks below. Well, you can see in this show, especially in the front over there are several Portland architecture type pieces. There are some waterfront Portland pieces where you can see the cityscape in the background and a couple bridge pieces. There's one here. Mom really loved the old bridges in Portland, and she did them quite a bit.
Do we have any questions from the gallery? Yeah.
Who were her mentors?
Well, when she studied at Oregon, Jack Wilkinson and Andy Vincent. Was there anyone else?
Dave McCosh.
Oh, Dave McCosh, yes.
Okay.
So those three. Then when my parents moved up to Portland, when we were little kids, it was when Mom first started doing printmaking, and the guys at the Portland Art Museum School, like Jack McClarty, Mike Russo, who am I forgetting? Anyway, the guys who were teaching at the museum school, I would say, were kind of mentors in that period too.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I'm a former Portland boy, and I'm just curious, you said that she bought a house and that the self-portrait one I'm just curious, what neighborhood is that in?
Close in Northwest Portland, 22nd and Hoyt.
All right, well, there are no more questions right now. Please peruse the gallery. And let's see, we have about 10 or 15 minutes until we move to the next stop, which will be the Oregon Arts Alliance. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the gallery, and we'll talk to you, let you know when we're about to take off.